Hi there, and welcome to Joy Sightings, edition number 27. Today I read to you Tales of the Resistance, Chapter 3, entitled The Taxi Resistance. Some people in Enchanted City said that taxis could get you wherever you needed to go, even in power outs. Some people said that the city taxi company was not afraid of burners and breakers and naysayers, but no one said it very loudly. The sharp wind moaned through the flop hole where Hero tried to sleep. These lonely weeks in Enchanted City had been dreadful. He was hungry and cold and felt lost. Above all, though he was ashamed to admit it, he was afraid. No one would give him work, and what little money he had was running low. He had no idea how to sight the king, and the ominous spell of the enchanter was weighing his heart with leaden dread. Hero longed for the daylight of Great Park, for caretaker and mercy, for the laughter of friends, for the comforting sound of the watchkeepers crying, "But the kingdom comes!" He longed for home. Light spilled through the cracks in the rickety shelters of Moir Oxan. The sentry cry of patrols disturbed the slumber of the weary people. "Sleep in the light! Sleep in the light!" they warned. But Hero couldn't sleep. Hero feared the wandering patrols. He knew an ugly scar on his cheek was evidence of branding, but he wasn't sure this enchanter's mark would satisfy interrogators. Wouldn't a breaker demand proof of identity, some surer certificate of adoption than the note humming in his heart? Hero despaired. Where was the king? How was he to be found? And what part was Hero supposed to play in the restoration? "Nay, nay, 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 nay," sounded the dread melody of the naysayers. "Nothing can be done, nothing will be done." Hero tried to hum a tune from the dance of the great celebration, but the melody was faint. He kept thinking, "I'm only a lad after all. The enchanter is powerful, and his league is mighty." He coughed. The stink of Enchanted City always choked his lungs. Suddenly he heard the dreadful sound that all the people feared. Papa, papa din. The pounding of the death drums. Another dragnet. He had escaped one only yesterday and had been forced to find a different flop hole. Hunting orphans, the enchanter's men conducted sweeping day raids in Moir Oxan, waking citizens from their sleep. Hero could hear the drums, and then the naysayers again, those singers who chanted tunes that smothered hope. He could hear the boot trump of the burners and breakers, the enchanter's secret police, running up and down flimsy fire exits. Suddenly, cudgels were hammering on doors in his very building. He heard children crying. He thought, "They have come for me. What can I do? Where can I hide?" Wham! The door to his flop hole banged open. Two burners rushed in, their pokers flaring. A ghostly breaker grabbed him from his mat. "Identification!" ordered one of the secret police. Hero was numb. What can I say? He turned to his meager pack of belongings and saw the handle of the hatchet caretaker had given him. "One moment," he mumbled. Hero bent to grab the handle and then turned swiftly, swinging the hatchet in front of him. His heart leapt in terror as he waited for a mighty blow to crush his skull. But to his amazement, the lights of the burners' pokers glowed dimmer. Cautiously, slowly, all three backed toward the broken door. "To the king! To my sovereign liege lord, to the one monarch of all, Hero cried. Power from the hatchet throbbed in his hands. His heart grew brave at his own shouting of the names. He lifted his tool and backed the burners and the breakers step by step out of the hole and down the outside fire exit. In the daylight, from the top of the rickety stairs, he could see that a circle of frightened children had been rounded up on the street. All were blindfolded so they would not see the light and thereby remember the look of day. Hero remembered when he had escaped from Enchanted City, a terrified orphan with death drums and burners in pursuit. He recalled how he had raced to safety with a little brother in his arms. If I can save just one more child from the enchanter, if I can keep one child from a life of bondage, if I can carry one child to mercy, my return to Enchanted City will have been worth it. Standing at the top of the fire exit, Hero raised his hatchet above his head. Anger flooded him, and he let forth a mighty shout. I am Hero, Ranger of Great Park, a king's man. There was a moment of silence. The death drums paused. The chant of the naysayers ceased. The whole sleeping city seemed to listen to his shout. Din, din, din. The death drums were sounding another beat, faster and faster, a battle beat. Hero realized that more burners and breakers were gathering in striking formation. He had done a foolhardy thing. Even with the hatchet in his hand, he was only one against many. He was in the middle of the enchanter's territory, with no fellow ranger to come to his aid. His only chance was in taking his opponents by surprise. Rushing down the stairs, Hero swung into the battle tactic he had learned in the War of Fire in Great Park. To the king! To the restoration! He cried, holding his hatchet with both hands. He jumped into the middle of the band of captured orphans. Scatter! He shouted. Take off your blindfolds and run! With his weapon at arm's length, Hero began to whirl as the children scattered, climbing stairs, turning street corners, scurrying into holes. Round and round Hero whirled, cutting a circle of emptiness between himself and his would-be captors. The enchanter's men were so intent on taking him prisoner, they let the children escape. For a moment, Hero felt a defiant gladness. Scarboy! Scarboy! The enchanter's evil eye had spotted him. The moment his old name was shouted, Hero began to freeze. His feet were leaden. His hatchet felt so heavy. Closer and closer inched the burners and breakers. One of the breakers caught Hero's eye and held it with a stare. Then he lifted his ugly cudgel over his head. Hark, 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 hark. From opposite directions, 2 taxicabs came careening down the narrow alley, their horns blaring, their speed frightening. Hark, hark! The enchanter's men scattered, and the taxis screeched to a stop within inches of the stunned Hero. Need a ride, buddy? A burly arm grabbed Hero and pulled him roughly into the front seat. As Hero frantically yanked the door shut behind him, his cab blasted into reverse and squealed around another corner. Within seconds, a whole fleet of taxis raced out of alleys and side streets. They drove for a while in a straight line and then veered off in opposite directions. Hark! 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 The horns blared in great commotion, and for a moment, Hero felt safe. No pursuer would know which cab had kidnapped him. But was he under arrest or under protection? Hero could just read the signs over the huge garage before the overhead door thudded shut behind them. City Taxi Company. There was a hustle as the driver detached from the power source. Hero's door was yanked open and he was pulled out, and it was only then that he realized that a small child had been huddled on the floor in back and was being hastened away. "Hey there, bub. Big operator wants to see you in the terminal office." The cabbie jerked his head to the left and then drove off. A man in uniform motioned Hero toward a glassed-in office. The next thing he knew, his wrist was being clasped in the ranger way. "Well, son, most rangers infiltrate Enchanted City as subtly as possible. The whole town knows you've arrived, not to mention the powers that be in the Dagoda. But welcome to the Resistance. We are all king's men and women here, working for the Restoration." Hero's mouth dropped, and Big Operator smiled. "Yes, sir, the dispatchers had themselves a job getting you out of that tight spot. It's not easy moving a taxi vanguard into position in a moment's notice. By the way, I think we picked up most of the orphans. That scattering tactic was pretty effective. The Resistance can use a man like you. How would you like to see the rest of the operation?" The two walked into the middle of the taxi terminal, a large underground cavern with a huge map of Enchanted City on one wall. Big Operator pointed to the section that was Moir Oxan. "The Enchanter puts most of the heat here. The people are poor and helpless, without wealth to barter for protection. As you know, orphans are taken to the orphan keeper and then put to work in the underground or on street crews." Big Operator pointed to purple paper flags stuck all over the map. "Sidings," he explained. "The king has been sighted all over the city. The Enchanter is nervous, what with that and power outs. Ha! Shortages don't bother the city taxi company. We've developed our own solar storage cells so that we can hook up or detach from the power. Never trust man-made power. But our informants say that the Dagoda's been a hot place with a whole lot of fire flying." The terminal thrummed with the rumble of taxi engines, ignitions starting, tires squealing, doors banging. Big Operator lifted his voice. "We have taxis posted all over the city. Those folks are dispatchers." He pointed to an electric panel where busy people wearing headsets monitored instruments. Hero noticed one dispatcher who seemed to be little more than a boy. "They keep tab on hot spots, send cabbies out on rescue sorties, whisk orphans off to Great Park if at all possible, and monitor sightings." Suddenly Hero remembered the cabbie who had taken him to the edge of the garbage heap when he had escaped from Enchanted City so long ago. He had thought then that the driver had shouted, "To the king!" Walking through a huge open door, Big Operator waved to a grease monkey, a woman wearing overalls. "Hey, Mac, here we had a little action this morning." Then to Hero. "This is the garage. Maintenance crews overhaul taxis, keep them in running condition, wash them down. The Enchanter has a fleet of fancy limousines, but I'll take a swift little Resistance taxi in top-notch condition any day." Hero's mind would not stop whirling. He didn't know which questions to ask first. But what about the Enchanter? How do you get by with this in the middle of Enchanted City? Big Operator smiled, but it was a grim expression. He put his arm around the lad's shoulders. "Make no mistake, the Enchanter is evil and he's dangerous. Never forget it. The closer the Restoration, the more sightings of the king, the more dangerous and desperate he will become." Then his smile became almost cocky. "But the truth is, the Enchanter only has power over those who fear him. Here in the Taxi Resistance, we are subjects of the king. Consequently, we are not afraid. Hero looked straight ahead at a wall placard that read, "Sighters are not afraid." Big Operator studied his heroic troublemaker. "Now, what are we going to do with you? You can't hear it in this underground terminal, but right now the death drums are beating out an all-points description on you. When the city wakes, you're going to be one wanted man. I don't dare make you a cabbie. That scar's too obvious. Last week I needed a first-rank dispatcher, but a new recruit arrived who seems to have an inborn instinct for operations." Big Operator walked over to the dispatcher's panel and checked a few notes that had been collected on clipboards. "Wait a minute. I think I have an idea. Little risky, but you're not without courage. I need to get you out of the terminal in case of raids. Stay right here." Hero stood by the dispatcher's board, still amazed by his rescue and the turn of events. What kind of job would demand courage? He thought of the death drums beating out his description for the second time in his life. This unfortunate scar. He would have liked being a cabbie. The dispatchers efficiently took messages and gave commands. "Zone 5-0-0. 2020's in the ready and can make pickup steady." What command they brought to their job. They monitored the whole city and made crucial life-saving decisions. He would have also liked to have been a dispatcher working for the Restoration. He watched the back of the boy, the new recruit, who appeared quick-minded, able, pausing to ask a question now and then. Leaning closer to the board, Hero thought, how exciting to receive word of a sighting. How could anyone be afraid who kept seeing the king? Without realizing it, Hero crowded the boy. The lad turned, looked up at him, and said, "Watch it! You're stepping on my gown." The voice was familiar, even the words had been spoken before. It was no boy at all. It was Princess Amanda, and as impertinent as ever. "I thought the idea was to infiltrate quietly, to be ready when the king needed us, not to draw attention to the resistance by announcing oneself to all of Enchanted City and making one royal nuisance of oneself." Hero was so glad to see her that he only laughed in amazement. "What are you doing here?" "The same thing you're doing here," she retorted. "Working for the Restoration. Only I'm doing it a little more quietly." And with that, she turned back to the board. Amazed, Hero folded his arms, waiting for his assignment. He still wanted to ask hundreds of questions, but the dispatchers were frantically busy, getting orphans to safety, no doubt. He thought about his recent battle, of the shouted names and the fresh rush of courage and the swinging hatchet, and he felt good. Maybe he was a hero after all, though a foolhardy one. Not only had he rescued one child, he had rescued many. Yes, sir, that was worth a trip back to Enchanted City. Suddenly, cocksure, he stretched out his hand and knocked Amanda's cap to the floor. Then he yanked on the braid that tumbled down her back. She yelped, turned toward him, and warned, "Remember, I have perfect aim." And all the dispatchers stopped their work to look at her. Quietly indeed, Hero thought to himself. So Hero waited for his new assignment with fresh hope and renewed courage, not caring how dangerous the task. He was no longer alone. but surrounded by a great and adventurous company, the taxi resistance. True friends were near. In fact, he suspected that the kingdom was all around him, if he but cared to find it.